This video is sponsored by Movie Palette.
Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Sophie Wilde takes talking to the hand a little bit too far in A24's Australian horror film, Talk to Me.
Still mourning the death of her mother Ria, played by Alexandria Stephenson, Mia, played by Sophie Wilde, takes her friend Jade and Jade's brother Riley, played by Alexandra Jensen, Joe Burr respectively, to a house party where the teens are using a mysterious embalmed hand to contact the dead and become temporarily possessed. As Mia and the teens continue to use the hand, they lose control of the contact, and Mia begins to see visions even when not using the hand, as the line between the living and the dead becomes dangerously blurred.
Talk to Me is the directorial debut of Australian twins Danny and Michael Filippo, the duo behind the YouTube channel Raka Raka, which specialises in stunt, prank and horror videos, and I've got to be honest, I've not seen any of their work. Sorry lads, I'm sure the 1 billion views you got on your channel more than makes up for that. But the Filippo twins have been wanting to get into filmmaking for quite some time, and have often worked as behind the scenes crew members on a number of Australian productions to kind of get their foot in the door and see how the process works, including most notably on Jennifer Kent's The Babadook. And it seems like if you want to make a great horror movie, that seems like a good place to learn your craft. Talk to Me was the big hit at the Sundance Film Festival this year. It was the big indie horror hit that was soon acquired by A24, which is pretty much a badge of honour for this kind of movie. So certainly there is a lot of hype behind the movie, and the Filippo twins have already managed to get themselves a deal directing a Street Fighter movie in the future. And there's an easy reason to see why, because once you see Talk to Me, you won't stop talking about it. Talk to Me, at its core, is quite simple and straightforward in its storytelling, especially reliant on familiar possession tropes, but it takes those ideas and gives them a fresh, modern spin that's especially relevant to today's teenagers in a social media age. The hand isn't just some urban legend that's passed down from party to party, but it becomes like a viral event to itself, in that people post about it online and then others feel that they have to try it. It becomes this social dare, and together they're each trying to push each other's limits and then post about it. And that's an interesting angle. And wisely, the Filippo twins decide that the hand itself isn't really the object of interest. They're not really focusing on the story of the hand. You get enough information of it, and then you get the rules of it, and you know that it's obviously connected to someone who once had the power to talk to the dead. But there's actually a scene where two characters are talking about the hand, and they actually have contradicting stories about where it came from, which suggests that it's been passed down so long that people have actually forgotten where its origins are, which is much more interesting because that means that it becomes more unknowable. It becomes something scarier. A lot of films like this do actually have a very heavy investive element, something like The Ring or more recently Smile, where the characters are trying to track down the origin of what's pursuing them to try and get out of their situation, and at points even going to good old Google, how do I get out of a death curse? And the Filippos don't go down that route, and apparently they did actually submit the script to a number of Hollywood studios, who often came back with the note, can you add a subplot where the characters search for the origin of the hand? And they went, no, we're not doing that because it's not very interesting. And that is the right answer. I do feel like that kind of procedural element has become very rote, often as a way of just trying to stretch out a story to feature length rather than trying to actually do anything with it. And it shows that they have much more on their mind with Talk to Me than just making a simple, straightforward horror movie. There is actually some genuine substance here. That's probably a quite bad term turn of phrase considering where I'm about to go, but I'm just going to stick with it. The hand is pretty clearly meant to function as a metaphor, specifically about drug abuse. It's something that gets passed around at the party, and the characters are getting off on the thrill of it, on the danger of it, of the excitement of it. They have to surrender themselves literally to it, and so you get these extreme reactions and personality changes, and they're all being filmed on their phone cameras. In fact, it's often a thing that pops up in this movie in that people keep filming scenes even when they probably shouldn't be, even when the characters are at their absolute lowest and most embarrassing moments, and that is a deliberate critique on the part of the filmmakers, the way these characters put themselves into vulnerable positions simply for clout, essentially. But of course, they get off on that at first, and then the dangers start to become more apparent, they start to become more manifested, and then it goes out of control. And the problem is that once that happens, there are some characters that just simply don't know when to quit. They are addicted to using the hand, even though it is pretty clear that the more they use it, the more self-destructive it becomes. But nevertheless, they're seduced by it. And so the allegory is pretty obvious to see, but it's not done in a way that feels heavy-handed or moralizing. It more feels like a cautionary tale. And this isn't something that I've pulled out of thin air. There are several moments where the characters bring up the subject of drugs, specifically Jade's mother Sue, played by Miranda Otto, who is depicted as being quite savvy. She knows that the kids are kind of up to no good because that's what they do, but also she's very firm. She doesn't want drugs in this house, and kind of gives the little interrogation at the door once the partygoers arrive. And so you have that there that's clearly meant to put in our mind that this is what the film is actually about. That seems very pointed, and there are several moments that kind of allude to the metaphor as well. But it is also a movie about grief. Mia is dealing with the anniversary of her mother's death, and clearly there is a lot of unresolved feelings within her about that, not least of which because the way that her mother died, it's not clear at first whether that was accidental or not, and that's probably about as far as I can say on that particular issue on YouTube. But nevertheless, there is this sense that maybe Mia is deliberately avoiding the subject because there might be some truths that are unpleasant about it, especially because she spends a lot of time with Jade and Riley. They essentially become her second family as a way of escaping from her own. Her father keeps calling her on her phone and she keeps avoiding the calls. Over the course of this movie, Mia not only has a motivation for keep on using the hand, but also why she's drawn towards it in the first place. There is something about it that makes her want to keep coming back to the hand and having that connection to the other side because of that possibility. Mia's discomfort with death is established early on in a scene where she's driving Riley to Jade's house and they encounter an injured kangaroo in the road, and Riley suggests putting it out of its misery, but Mia struggles to go through with the act and ultimately decides to opt out of it and simply drive away. And this actually reminded me of a very similar scene in another recent Australian horror film called Sissy, which is on Shudder and came out last year, and it does feel like these two movies actually would make a good double feature with each other. They do have kind of similar ideas in some respects, particularly with modern social media culture, but this scene establishes that Mia struggles to go through with that action, and that's something that comes back later in the movie. She struggles to do what might be the right thing in that action, even if it's unpleasant. I don't actually agree with that opinion, but that's clearly what the film is implying in that particular moment. And Sophie Wilde is absolutely fantastic in this movie. She's a relative newcomer, but I could easily see this being a star-making role for her that puts her on a lot of people's radars. In fact, she was already on mine because she impressed me earlier this year in the Henson-backed fantasy movie The Portable Door, which, funnily enough, also co-starred Miranda Otto, where she made the most out of a kind of underwritten love interest, but here, front and centre, Wilde really shines. She gives the character a lot of empathy, particularly in the more dramatic scenes where you understand her mindset, if not necessarily all of her decisions. But the way she commits to the physicality of the part, especially in the possession scenes, now that is really outstanding, especially in that first scene where she's taking control of the hand and she turns into this completely different person and she just becomes so threatening and so menacing in the way that she just uses her gestures. It's phenomenal acting. Wilde shows a lot of promise in this movie. And I know that some people say that Mia isn't a likeable character, but that's not the point. She is grieving after all. She's not making the best decisions because A, we wouldn't have a movie, and B, you aren't thinking totally rationally in that mindset. Sometimes you do make selfish decisions. That is indeed the point. The allegory of the movie is the fact that she keeps on using the hand even after the point where it's established that it's a danger to herself and her friends, because she thinks the more she keeps using it, the more she can try and control it, the way that she can try and reverse what has happened to her and her friends, and only realises, maybe too late, that actually it's poisoning her. She's become seduced by it, and she doesn't realise that the more she keeps using it, the worse she's becoming, and she's trying to justify it to herself. She's trying to justify her actions. She thinks she's right, but in actuality, she's out of control and doesn't even realise it. I'm not trying to excuse the writing here, because that's precisely what it's trying to accomplish. It's trying to show someone that is in a spiral but doesn't even know that they are in one. But enough talking about metaphor. Is it actually scary on its own terms? And I would emphatically say yes, it is. And for the first half of the movie, it's in a fun way. You like the characters at the party, you're enjoying the vicarious thrill of watching these people become possessed in front of you. It becomes its own kind of spectacle that's unpredictable and volatile, and that's part of the enjoyment of it. But also there's a bit of dark humour running through these possession scenes, especially because it's an out-of-body experience and these characters are doing things that are quite disturbing and embarrassing, and that's all part of the joke, essentially. There's a moment involving a dog that actually made a couple of people walk out in my screening, but certainly there's a bit of an amusement from that, and there is some uneasy laughter from the audience at certain other moments as well. And I do think there is some points of comparison to movies like Flatliners, for example. It does have that kind of idea of young people playing around with the boundaries of life and death. They turn it into a game, essentially, like the characters in that movie, and then the game goes too far, and then suddenly it's not a game anymore. And here's the thing, about halfway through the movie, there is a major sequence where the tone of the film completely changes. This is a key plot point for the entire second half of the movie, and A24 have completely left it out of the publicity, which is a wise decision because it maintains the shock of this moment. They have a lot of experience in doing that, in cutting trailers that don't give too much away, and in some cases deliberately mislead the audience. And I'm going to try and maintain that as best as possible, because Talk to Me is best viewed without knowing all these surprises in advance. But this is a scene where you know that something bad is going to happen, and then the way that it plays out is so much worse than you thought it would be. It's at that moment that Talk to Me reveals its true sting in the tail and just how dark it really is. It has a really nasty streak to it, but not for its own sake. It is very purposeful, and it's the kind of scene that in my audience absolutely stunned them completely. You could hear a pin drop after this scene played. We were all completely shell-shocked by this moment, and it carries through to the entire second half of the movie. Suddenly, you spend the whole of that portion of the film completely on edge. I'm not lying here. This is the most tense I have been during a horror movie in a very, very long time. I don't think I've actually been genuinely as chilled by a horror film since the time I watched It Follows. I felt really unnerved by what happened in that scene, and with each passing twist and development, the movie gets darker and bleaker, and it commits to it. It doesn't pull any punches. Talk to Me is absolutely pitch black, and the more it goes down into this disturbing hole, the more compelling it gets. And that's also a testament to Filippo's direction as well, in that they know how to turn those screws on the audience. It's a really impressive and assured debut from them. Yes, their cinematography is really energetic and youthful, and certainly that makes the movie stand out, particularly in the montage sequences. But I think what really impresses is just how in command of the direction they are. And there's a reason why the direction feels so assured. It's because they're not debut directors in the conventional sense. The Filippo brothers have made plenty of horror shorts on YouTube. That was their film school. So this movie is the culmination of all those efforts, everything that they've learned in how to use the genre, how to work an audience, and how to build tension and suspense. Even scenes you've seen done in tons of other horror movies have this kind of off-kilter edge. They're done in ways that feel different than other horror movies, and this kind of scrappy vibe that they bring to the film in terms of their direction, but also because it's an indie movie, they make the best of it, and so it genuinely feels unpredictable in a way that a lot of its studio cousins just honestly can't. That shows that these two have so much potential in the future, but also I think we're seeing the actualization of something that I think people have been theorizing for a while, in that we are seeing that transition from YouTube to filmmaking. That pipeline is actually coming to fruition. I can see a lot of people starting to make that jump, and I think we're going to see a very big seismic shift, not just in terms of horror, but in terms of all genres, in the terms of the way films are made. And Talk to Me is a very promising example of what might be in the future. We're currently in a very strong period for horror as a genre, but even by those standards, Talk to Me stands out. It's an audacious calling card for a number of very promising potential talents, including the Filippo twins, but also Sophie Wilde, who absolutely carries this movie on her back with a fearless, completely committed performance. She is absolutely one to watch out for. But this movie genuinely got under my skin in a way that even critically acclaimed horror movies of the last few years haven't. Even the ones that have had a lot of hype behind them, like Barbarian, I found a little bit underwhelming when I saw them. That's not the case with Talk to Me. There is something genuinely quite rattling about this movie, and I think that's because even though it has a relatively simple story, it's done with such verve, but also it does actually have some storytelling depth to it at its centre, and I think that's what really resonates. And I think if you're a horror fan, this is absolutely one you've got to see. I dare you.
You've probably seen this swish thing in the background of the entire video. This is a movie palette. It takes the colour tone of an entire movie and turns it into this artwork. So each of these lines represents a scene or sequences from the entire movie. In this case, this is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And if you would like a movie palette of your own, then you can go to moviepalette.com and use the code FilmBrain15 to get 15% off your order. And thanks again to Movie Palette for sponsoring this video.
If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip at my Ko-fi page, or where YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video, or you can buy some of my merch from my TeePublic page, or you can make contact with my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, or you can simply like, share and subscribe. Those all help as well. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck. fading out.